Landless Juan. The suffix less is a negative addition to a word. It removes, it means without. When you add it to a noun, it means the same as no or not. An example, I'm homeless, which means I have not got a home. Landless, rootless, penniless, luckless, homeless, loveless. Yes, you understand. That's what being a migrant is. Immigrant, émigrant, or émigré.
They we all know. The experts, the sociologists. They study them and give us updated figures. How many poor people are there? What work do they do when they work? How much do they not eat? How much do they not weigh? How tall are they not? What do they not think? What do they not vote for? What do they not believe in? All we need to find out now is, why are poor people poor? They who are the dead in war, and the dead in hurricanes, the landslides, in the earthquakes, in the floods, in the droughts, and in the other disasters of civilizations. They who in jail are the loneliest prisoners, and in the factories are the cheapest hands. Is it that the poor are poor because their hunger feeds us, and their nakedness clothes us? Greetings and special greetings to the two main sponsors of this forum, and very special greetings for the authorities of Rivas Vacia Madrid. We are here in the capital of worldwide integration, and this is very important for all of us, and very special greetings for all the participants. With your permission, I'd like to highlight the worldwide dimension of the migration phenomena, according to the data we have. It's very significant data, which tells us that in just a few years, the migrants of the world went from 90 million to 175 million migrants, according to these latest figures. And when we identify these migrant numbers, we are talking about those migrants who have not yet been integrated into their host countries.
So, let's say there are 175 million out there. I don't know how they've been counted, and we don't have to get into that now. But this means they're a very small minority of all of us living on Earth, of people that move. The overwhelming majority don't move.
The world is our home, and in the First World Forum, we emphasize the need to think in terms of universal citizenship. It may seem utopian, and it most probably is utopian. A universal citizenship starts with a conscience that we should all have of being a world citizen.
I feel like a world citizen because, well, because I live in Germany, because I'm an immigrant in Germany, and I identify with immigrants. So it's a mixture of the three that I feel.
To find a better place, because I don't see a future for my country, or for the need I have to do things that will be respected and indeed valued.
We in Europe have lived some very violent anti-immigration cycles. But in reality, if we take a wider perspective, a broader view of the present phase, which is quite anti-immigrant, then we can see that we are quite hybrid. We are very mixed. We were immigrants, of course, but as I've said before, we left with our rights and our obligations. And when we arrived there, from day one, we had our jobs and our son placed in a school because since he left first, he had to find a place to stay. And, well, he found one, for better or worse. He had his animals, his chickens and his rabbits for when we got there, and we left kind of like those people who come here on their rafts.
For me, the change was really good. And since I've been in Spain, I felt like I was at home, but with other people. It's as if I were sharing my old house, but with new tenants. And I was well received here. I think that immigrants are those who impose ethical criteria. A more consistent ethical postulate, which states that not only is another world possible, but it's urgent and it's necessary. A more caring world. Immigrants and history shows us this. They are always a sign of great changes.
I wanted to, but I never went to school. What can I say? But after all is said and done, well, that's what I would have liked, to have studied. But I wanted my son to be different from me, to study and be better than me. They've got a debt in their country of origin. If you don't pay, they can kill a daughter of yours, or they can take away your things, or they can kill your mom. Because in the end, you left to work in order to send money for your kids to get an education. That's the story of all immigrants, men and women. People leave to educate their children. They take care of the children of others or the elderly so that their children can get an education back home.
Our happiest moments? That was when the kids were put in school, and we were living just like the French, or even better than the French. We were living better than many Frenchmen.
But there are regions where some areas are almost deserted. In many countries, you can't imagine it. Places where you can see an old person with a child, or there are men alone with children too. Me alone with 4 kids. Well, I had to fight for a living because I lived alone for 7 months in Guadix with the kids. And, well, I didn't want to go to France because I didn't want to leave. But what was I going to do with the kids there? And then I got there and I had a tough time because I didn't know how to speak. So there's the issue of family disintegration, a serious issue, but that isn't really talked about. Here they're fighting for work permits, but we've got to fight for people to be able to reunite their families.
Society is more and more racially mixed, like it or not. And these people, if not them, their children raised amongst us, are going to form part of our society. So we must normalize cohabitation. And cohabitation can only be normalized through total access to civil rights and political rights in order to prevent future conflicts. What we don't want to happen or to spread are the types of conflicts like they have had in France. We're talking about second generations. We're not talking about immigrants or the conflicts that arise every summer in the United Kingdom.
Now, be careful. Look at France. Look at the second generation issue. And talking too about rural populations migrating to cities. In urban areas, the ghettos are dangers. Kids growing up there who don't even have a football pitch or whatever to play. They've been marginalized. They've been absolutely, well, always fearful. How do you teach your children your values, deeply rooted values, so people teach their values, the values of their parents? But the second generation, look at what happened in France, what happened and is still happening. The second generations, be careful. Be careful with the second generations.
Viva Rivas! Viva Africa! Viva Senegal! Viva Senegal! Viva Senegal! Senegal Sumareula! Viva Senegal! Senegal Sunugal! Lokomalenda! Maïda! Senegal Sunugal! Sunugal!
Africa is fully integrated in the global system, like the other continents. And even if we take the percentages which represent exports to GDP, we find that Africa is even more integrated than other regions of the world in the global system. But it is integrated at the lowest level. Hunger as a cause for emigration is maybe a Western perspective on the African problem. Immigration, hunger as a motive which obliges people to leave their homes. We have done a study that shows us the opposite. And we have found causes, certain causes which are linked to hunger, but which are more related to underdevelopment. In Africa, the problem isn't a lack of land. It's not a problem of agrarian reform. In Africa, that is. It's a problem of the quality of the land. In Africa, the problem is the quality of the land, meaning of destruction by drought, by war, etc., of the ecosystems. The Sahara advances 10 kilometers south each year. In Africa, there is no currency. Our currencies are the currencies of foreigners, from Western countries. We are waiting for an African currency as a source of development. There are currently some 138 million ecological refugees, who are farmers that have lost their land because of drought or desertification, of lowering of the water tables. So they have lost their land and have ended up in slums, completely marginalized, in Kampala, in Bamako, in Niamey, in Dhaka. If you go to Dhaka, I go there at least every 2 years, there's a new shantytown on the Cape. You can see it every time. Which means that it is integrated at all the global imperialist levels. The reasons for the farmers' misery are many. In Bangladesh and in other countries of Southern Asia, it is the tenant farming contracts. In Bangladesh, I did a mission, which are terrible. In tenant farming, the landlord takes 2/3 of the harvest. They can't possibly live on that.
The issue is that when dealing with people, let's say that when the human being turns into an object to be abused, sold, cheated, to be taken over because of debt, for example. Also, I would like also to talk about violence, because if you talk about prostitution, there will be people who say, oh, it's easy to become a prostitute because it's easy for her to have pleasure, to have customers, to make money. But if we talk about violence in my country in Asia, and I think it will soon be coming to France, of violence, it has been 3 years now that violence has been present by groups against prostitutes. In the case of the agreement, the person, even though he hasn't used transport, and although his identity papers are in order, well, he's cheated, and the terms of reference are changed. This is the treatment they get, where additionally they are cheated. They told you they were going to work in a factory or in a home or a butcher's, for example, and they bring you straight to a brothel, or they chain your ankle like they do in some countries that I'd rather not name. And you have to be in the sweatshop day and night, sleeping in some corner. That is slavery. 4 million women are bought and sold a year. 4 million is a lot, and in smuggling circles that is a lot of money. I think it's the second biggest moneymaker. So we should really be careful with this. And I think we should also talk about inequality, as you mentioned before. For me, inequality is the root of prostitution and the trade of humans. So, today, if you all want to live in dignity, we all have to work together. The World Social Forum on Migrations held in Rivas Vacia, Madrid, Spain in June of 2006 provided a glimpse of what was to come in the Canary Islands the following August of that same year, an avalanche of sub-Saharan immigrants. While the country was enjoying a sun-drenched and sleepy summer holiday, we witnessed the landing of over 15,000 human beings on the shores of those islands, people trying to save the only thing they had left, their lives. The NGOs managed 85% of this crisis. Without their active and efficient participation, there would have been a conflict of unpredictable consequences. Clandestine, illegal, without papers, and for the thousands who died during the journey, lifeless. These are some of the labels the media insist on tagging the immigrant with.
Faced with a constant presence in the media of anti-immigration messages, critical and fear-ridden, today we can hear the voices of the affected, the voice of the immigrants.
These labels distance us from their humanity, and we stop perceiving them as people. We don't know their names or their stories, and they are turned into faceless statistics that threaten our security and well-being. I can tell you, and I'm very sorry to do so, you're very alone, absolutely alone. And so many unmarked graves, not only of those who died in what happened recently between Ceuta and Morocco, but also in Arizona, and also in other areas, in other regions. There are many dead. There are many nameless people.
I'd like to bring up the issue, especially for those of you here from the Canary Islands, of the some 10,000 dead who drowned in the waters between the African coast and the Canary Islands looking for that European dream and fleeing from the European and Spanish patrol boats. There are more and more of them, and they don't even have a right to show their papers to repatriate their dead. And talking about the Canary Islands, now that we're here, I'd like to remind you, because at this very moment there are people arriving, and there are people dying. There are many graves, and it's very sad, that have no tombstones, which say immigrant number 1, immigrant number 2, immigrant number 3. There are no names, there are no faces. Nobody can mourn at these tombs, and this is appalling.
The reality is that immigrants are those who make the economies of wealthy countries function. They are the cheap labor, used and abused, and who do the hardest work for the lowest pay. And the money they send home sustains the weak economies of their countries of origin.
For us, these waves of migration, especially these latest waves of migration caused by the structural adjustment process, are a result of the international labor market fundamentally. You live in fear all the time because of it. I didn't need or want to do illegal papers, forged papers. But if you don't have them, you don't work. There are job opportunities in the countries of the North, and their economies depend on these workers, structurally speaking. And if these workers don't arrive, these economies can't function. Well, the brothers said that no matter how big they built it, no matter how thick, they're going to get through anyways. No walls will stop them. The brothers say they need us more than we do. We left because of need, and they're going to be there all their lives. It's different from the United States. There it's a struggle to see whose head you're going to step on, or who's going to step on your head. And the government of the United States invests more and more money to stem the flow of illegal immigration. And coincidentally, 500,000 of workers with no papers get through. So one asks oneself, or they aren't investing enough, or they're very inefficient at what they're doing, or they are totally corrupt. However tall the walls are, we are going to keep getting through. They can't stop us. In the United States, I met a 19-year-old boy, an Honduran, who had crossed the border 5 times. In Mexico, the issue of immigration is basically a daily affair in all the indigenous villages, mainly because the rural world has been abandoned for decades. And the indigenous world is a rural world. So conditions of poverty are worst among indigenous communities. So they are forced to migrate. Mexico, United States 5 times. And since he's Honduran, he had to cross 3 borders to arrive in Mexico every time. The first 4 times they deported him. They sent him straight back to Honduras. So he had to cross all the borders again in order to cross the US border again. And he crossed the jungle 3 times. But the point is, if you don't see any other way out, and you leave your country because you feel you have to, you're going to keep on doing it. Because the systems makes us act as if we were stopping the flow, and at the same time makes us let the flow go through, depending on the needs of the labor market. When it's harvest time in California, everyone on the Border Patrol staff suddenly develops an interest in stargazing, and they pass through thousands and thousands and thousands of migrant workers.
Our memory is very short. We have forgotten that Europe was once a source of immigrants. Wars, political repression, and famines displaced millions of Europeans to faraway lands. Between 1900 and 1913, 180,000 Spaniards a year emigrated in search of better opportunities.
It's an organization that was created in Spain in 1979, which doesn't claim to be a charitable organization, but which wants to return the solidarity received by Spaniards throughout history on those occasions in which they had to leave their country seeking refuge and protection from persecution. I had a truck, and the truck could legally carry 3,500 kilos. But the police were stopping me all the time. So finally I had to abandon the truck in France and go back to my family in Guadix.
Between 1960 and 1975, over 1 million Spaniards emigrated to Europe. In 1973, there were still some 2 million Spanish immigrants living in the Americas. And even today, Spain is the 6th country in the world in terms of the amount of money its immigrants send back home. According to the World Bank, in 2004, the Spanish who live and work abroad sent home over $7 billion. And my dream was always to return to Spain.
And we didn't like living there. First of all, it was very foggy and very cold. We didn't like it. It wasn't our idea of an ideal life, living there with the French.
World geography is imperfect. Land without people, people without land, nations without territory, forgotten peoples fighting for a state of their own. Look, the organizations in Colombia say that it's usual to think that there's migration because there's war. And the organizations in Colombia say no, there's war so that there will be migration.
The indigenous peoples in Mexico are in the same situation as almost all indigenous peoples around the world. Of external colonization at first, then with internal colonization, stripping them of their land, of their territories. And now there's a plundering of their cultural heritage, their natural resources, and, indeed, a situation of poverty. For the Kuna people, their dreams are what's most important. Like that you learn everything from your dreams. You get medicine, you get, let's say you learn how to produce. You get all knowledge from them.
A second, very important step in women's lives are the years. We're talking years now of female re-education. Because, in fact, these years are the years when open fighting was happening. Because it's also important to say that in the first step, women in the refugee camps were almost alone. The analysis made by the indigenous farmer organizations in Colombia is that there are people making a lot of money from the war, and war is the method.
If someone doesn't talk about their dreams, everyone gets worried. So that's really a habit in the communities. But that's getting lost. Many people are losing the habit. Many people go to the city, and when they come back, they come to the community and they tell other types of stories. They talk about what happened in the city, or in novels, or in soap operas. And that's breaking the tradition. Now it's another type of dreaming, created by technology, or plastic dreams.
Perhaps the cruelest migration is that which distances us from ourselves when we abandon the basic principles of solidarity and social justice, filling our lives with alienation and emptiness.
De tus besos dame el calor, pa' calmar mi cruel sinsabor.
There's a storm tonight on land. The seas are rough and I'm afraid. And I breastfeed Yusuf. I'm sailing to your country to an uncertain future. And tonight I'm a single cloud, a plastic bag. I've left everything behind. And now put yourself in my spot. You have it all. But maybe your grandfather traveled to another place between the sky and nowhere. You're overweight, and my people are dieting on horrors and famines. You've got a bed yet can't sleep. I bring you dreams that give names to things. You wear a brand name watch on your wrist, and I bring you the time of a jungle in silence, of a love with no hurries, of a natural light. I'm not coming to steal your bread and butter. Cheap labor is the apple you bite. The body for rent is the sleazy nightclub. I'll build your house. I'll care for your elderly. I'll clean your house, your wide avenues. I'll populate with smiles and children's songs your empty spaces and your closed-down schools. My heart is an island from the sky, a statue of salt without work papers. Put yourself in my spot. There's a storm tonight in our lives. My name is Amira, Lorenzo, Makwi, Masha, Viorica, Abdul. In my language it means joy, rain, traveler, landless Juan, hope.